Hello, everyone. So here is teaching primary source analysis in the social studies classroom. Really, this is just a completely short overview just to kind of create an artifact of this topic. All right, so what is a primary source? So in the easiest way to remember it, it's the evidence from the time period being studied. Examples include newspaper articles, letters, speeches, statues, paintings, a post hole. This is my favorite. If anybody in here loves antiquity or studying ancient Rome or Greece, then you know that archaeologists have figured out how to measure the post hole. So literally where your posts went to help you build your house, and we can measure them and learn a lot about them. So post holes, literally just holes in the dirt, are primary source artifacts. Any type of artifact. Think about Black Panther, all of those masks that are allegedly from the Benin but are really from Wakanda. All of that type of stuff, those are artifacts, those are primary sources. So we want to be able to teach our students to analyze primary sources. But one of the ways that we need to do that is we need to give them some structure, right? You don't just want to throw them in and say, okay, what's happening here? Tell me about it. So instead, we have frameworks for analyzing primary sources. There are common misconceptions about primary sources, which is one of the other reasons we don't want to just throw them in. A lot of students and adults, but a lot of students assume that a primary source is neutral. It's so old, it must predate any sort of bias that we might have today. That is incorrect, right? People in the past who are creating things just like us today. So we all have our biases and our points of view, and so primary sources are not neutral. Another thing to be aware of, especially when not dealing or when dealing with anything that comes with a more modern explanation, and by more modern, I just mean like after it was created. So it could be from the 1800s, this explanation of something from the 1600s. That's also bias. The description is also bias. And I'm going to pull out Black Panther again with the museum scene, but think about how we have those little paragraphs that accompany artifacts in museums. And they kind of gloss over a lot of the history of how that artifact got in the museum, because that was just not an interesting point, or wasn't necessary to explain, or just wasn't on top of that. So we really want to think about the fact that descriptions of artifacts have biases, right? So we're basically, it's an enigma wrapped in a puzzle piece thing. Yes, I can't remember the rest of that quote, but it's a really good one. So if you look it up, good job. So there are two common frameworks for analyzing primary sources that are used in a lot of grade 6 through 12 classrooms. And those are either SOAPS or HIP. SOAPS, which I will be completely upfront, it's the one I prefer. So again, this is a framework. This is to get you started with analyzing primary source. So as you ask, what is the subject? Right, what's the topic? What's it about? What's the occasion? What was happening when it was written? Audience, who is it intended for? This is a really big question, because especially when something is written, like an article in a newspaper, they're like, oh, everyone. No, you need to have your students and yourself asking how many people could read. How is information disseminated at this time? Even if it's a speech, how is it getting to different groups? Is this book that was published probably actually only intended for, say, educated people who could read in this time period, right? Is this is the audience the people for this statue who live in this city? So you really want to think about that instead of, because a lot of times we're just like, oh, it's just a general audience. It's not. It is not just a general audience, and we need to ask those really digging questions to get into that. Purpose. Why was it created? You feel like this goes with occasion, which is what was going on when it was created, and sometimes it is, but it's that why, because everything is created for a reason. I'm creating this video to teach you all how to analyze primary sources. That's why. What was the occasion that happened that led me to this? We were going over it in class, and it became clear that frameworks for studying analyzing primary sources had not really been introduced or further explained in the past, and so we really needed to dig into it. But that's not my purpose. And so my purpose is to teach how to do this. And speaker. Speaker is actually really a stand-in for creator, but the ending so with C didn't work as well. So speaker is just who created it. And you want to kind of think like, why would they create it? Who are these people? What's going on in their life? A really easy way that I usually give as an explanation is if this is something being written in a newspaper in 1859 and it's a person in the South and they're a plantation owner and they own enslaved people and they are writing an article talking about why it is good to own enslaved people, you kind of need to include that point of view that they already own enslaved people, right, in your analysis of what's going on. HIP. So HIP is another popular framework for analyzing primary sources. It's not mine, but it is popular. So historical context, and that kind of goes with the subject and the occasion, right? That puts subject and occasion together. What's the big story of what's happening and what's going on? Intended audience. So this does kind of tell you right from the beginning to think about who it was created for. Because again, when someone creates something, they have an audience in mind. Now, it could be that they're doing a private journal. Well, the intended audience then is themselves. And that's going to be really different than a public speech. We all know that when we put in a diary is different than when we put in a letter, which is different than when we would put in a newspaper article, which is different than what we would give in a speech, because all four of those aspects have very different intended audiences. The first P is purpose. So again, why is it created? And the second P is point of view. And that includes that speaker component in there, like who created it, why, what was their point of view that they were trying to get across. So we're going to do a really quick go into perusal. And so there are two different sources. So if you weren't in class on Saturday and you want to, you can look over this. But we have one that's the decision to use the atomic bomb from February 1947 by Henry Louis Stimson. This one comes with that paragraph prior to reading the document that, again, gives explanations. And so we want to make sure that we remember that these are not neutral themselves. So it gives us this article about the dropping of the atomic bomb, or it says that this is, this is an article about dropping the atomic bomb. It's a decision. Stimson was the former Secretary of War, right? So the dropping of the bomb, if you look through it, so subject, it's the dropping of the atomic bomb. Occasion, the bomb had been dropped. Audience, okay, this is where we start to think, because he's publishing this in Harper's Magazine. So that's going to be not your general public, and it's going to be a more educated public. So he's obviously, this is not like for everyone's consumption, right? This is more of an educated, wealthy-ish, say middle class and above document. Purpose, why is he doing it? Well, okay, we can go into it, but he's giving reasons for why they had to drop the atomic bomb. And so purpose, to defend dropping the atomic bomb. Speaker, Stimson, former Secretary of War, right? And his point of view was, it's a good thing we dropped the bomb. You'll notice we can actually, other than like say purpose, we can tell a lot before we even get into the source. And again, this is a way to give students just a framework. So they already have kind of a background or an understanding before they go into it. And so purpose is going to be one of those questions that we really have to ask why. And so if we're doing HIP, it's the same thing. Historical context, intended audience, purpose, and point of view. Purpose and point of view, you'll notice, kind of go together in that HIP structure. And so we have another one, which is Carl T. Compton, If the Atomic Bomb Had Not Been Used. This primary source, and so you can give these to your students too. This one doesn't have that paragraph that comes before, because this is literally kind of a standalone primary source that I created a PDF of, right? This is one that was created for students to use in class. You can see primary source question with primary source document with questions, DBQs, document-based questions. And this is another one, but you can do the exact same thing. What you're going to do over time, most likely, is what is called the gradual release of responsibility, where you first teach them how to analyze based on these formats, and then you go into slowly in groups, probably mixed ability grouping and various other things, let them start to take on more and more of this analyst responsibility. So a really good way to teach primary sources is, I'm going to add this because I didn't think of it, gradual, actually I'm going to put it in the middle. It's going to go right in the middle, everybody. Gradual release of responsibility is a great way. Remember, every single one of us has writing and reading in our standards for social studies. So we are required to teach this. And we want to make sure that we are teaching this in a way that our students have skills that they can transfer and keep with them. And a really good way to do that is to use one of these frameworks to help them understand what they need to be thinking of as they begin to address a primary source.